In the midst of a freezing winter, three men stand atop a mountain, stripping off every piece of clothing. They each pull out a vial of serum and inject it straight into their necks. Their target? A line of cavalry stationed on the opposite cliff. This is Carnival Row, one of the most daring and visually stunning fantasy series in recent years. 3 days earlier, Rycroft followed the 13th Light Dragoons of the Berg Republic as they arrived at an elven monastery. Their mission? To maintain the telegraph lines in the area. Although the abbess wasn't fond of humans, she had no choice but to cooperate. After all, the Elven Kingdom and the Berg Republic were allies. However, the Elven Kingdom had already lost much of its land to the enemy coalition. Refugees poured into the monastery in overwhelming numbers. Concerned about guerrilla forces made up of rebel elves, the captain ordered Rycroft and Darius to scout the perimeter. In the hills behind the monastery, Rycroft discovered a set of footprints. Strangely, they vanished in front of a cave carved into the mountainside. Inside, he found something extraordinary, an artificially built chamber with an ancient book placed at its center. Just then, an elf descended from above, swiftly pinning Rycroft down. Her name was Vignette, and she was the guardian of this place. This wasn't just any cave, it was the Elven Library, a sanctuary holding centuries of elven knowledge. Vignette was prepared to kill Rycroft to protect its secrets, but eliminating him could bring disaster upon the monastery if the unit discovered his disappearance and launched an investigation. Rycroft swore to keep the library a secret. After some hesitation, Vignette let him go. When the abbess learned about this, she ordered Vignette to keep a close watch on Rycroft. One day, Rycroft was assigned to repair a broken telegraph line on the mountain. With Vignette's help, the new line was quickly secured across the ravine. During a break, the two began talking and discovered they shared a common passion: books. As a gesture of gratitude, Rycroft gifted Vignette his favorite book, The Moonlit Kingdom. The story follows a human explorer who falls in love with a princess from the Moonborn race. After their child is born, the explorer mysteriously disappears, leaving the half-blood child to search for his father across worlds. At first, Vignette dismissed the tale as mere fantasy, but Rycroft insisted it was a masterpiece, so she reluctantly accepted the book. As they waited for the telegraph repairs to be completed, danger lurked nearby. Hidden enemy soldiers sprang into action, injecting themselves with the serum. They transformed into werewolves and launched a brutal assault on the unit. Rycroft spotted one of them devouring a fellow soldier. It took 4 consecutive gunshots to bring the beast down. Before he could catch his breath, another werewolf tackled him to the edge of the cliff. At the last moment, Vignette saved his life. Darius, battered but alive, crawled out from a ditch. He had managed to kill another werewolf, but as Rycroft noticed the blood on Darius' body, a chilling thought crossed his mind. Had he been bitten? Darius reassured him, "It's not my blood. It's theirs." Back at camp, Rycroft reported his findings. The vials contained a catalyst, a substance that allowed werewolves to transform even without a full moon. For a while, things returned to a fragile sense of normalcy. During their free time, Rycroft and Vignette often discussed the Moonlit Kingdom. One day, she even invited him into the Elven Library. She showed him a rare manuscript. To his shock, its story was nearly identical to the Moonlit Kingdom, except this time, the characters were a human and an elf. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, Vignette felt different about Rycroft. Unlike other humans, he intrigued her. A few days later, a telegraph arrived from the front lines. With casualties rising, the wounded were in desperate need of blood donations. The captain ordered volunteers to donate, and the elves were tasked with transporting the blood supply. The moment he heard about the blood drive, Rycroft disappeared. He slipped away into a hidden cave where Vignette was waiting. The emotions they had suppressed for so long finally erupted. Vignette noticed the scars on Rycroft's back. Rycroft decided to reveal the truth about his past. He was a half-blood, born to a human and an elf. As soon as he was born, his wings were cut off, and he was sent to an orphanage. The orphanage headmaster taught him from a young age to avoid doctors. He could never expose his true identity. Humans were extremely prejudiced against elves in their society. That was why he avoided the blood donation. Rycroft told Vignette that, for the first time in his life, he felt at home with her. Vignette had already given her heart to him long ago. On the night of the full moon, Darius secretly sneaked out of the monastery. He had hidden the fact that he had been bitten by a werewolf. After a night of wild running, he woke up at dawn next to the corpse of a stag. Rycroft tossed him some clothes, showing no intention of turning him in. Now that Darius had become a werewolf, he could also smell the elven blood on Rycroft. The two were old friends and promised to keep each other's secrets. Soon, a war report arrived. The Berg army had suffered a complete defeat. The enemy airships would arrive at any moment. Rycroft and Vignette met in the back hills, planning to escape to a small northern town. Both humans and elves in the monastery started evacuating, but before they could leave, the airships arrived. Vignette was sent to lock up the library. Meanwhile, under the relentless bombing, humans were being slaughtered. The elves had the advantage of flight and could escape. For humans, however, escape was nearly impossible. Rycroft knew Vignette's nature. She would risk her life to save him, so he begged the abbess to tell Vignette that he had died in battle. He wanted her to take Vignette and escape as soon as possible. When Vignette heard that Rycroft had died, she collapsed in grief. The abbess helped her leave. Meanwhile, Rycroft and Darius managed to escape. 7 years later, the capital of the burg had become a melting pot of different races. Rycroft had become a detective in the city's police force. Because of a case, fate led him and Vignette to meet again. Above the dark forests, barbed wire fences stretched endlessly. Elven corpses hung densely from them. This was once the elves' homeland, now occupied by the enemy. A group of elven refugees was fleeing for their lives. One of them tripped and fell, just as a starving wolf lunged toward him. Vignette arrived in time, engaging in a fierce fight with the beast. Despite her frail frame, she managed to kill the wolf. But by then, the soldiers had caught up. The elven refugees were all massacred. At the last moment, Vignette ran to the cliff and leaped onto a cargo ship. These refugees were supposed to escape on this very ship. For the past 7 years, Vignette had worked with the ship's captain to smuggle elves into the burg. But now, survival in the elven homeland was becoming impossible. The captain could no longer help his people. All he could do was beg the captain to take him to the burg. Inside the cargo hold, many of the refugees Vignette had brought huddled together. They had no money for passage and had signed labor contracts with the captain. They would work in the burg to pay off their debt. That night, Vignette sat quietly, looking at the book Rycroft had given her. Tucked inside was a photograph of him. She had been faithful all these years, keeping the elven mourning braid for 7 years as a widow. But that very night, disaster struck. A violent storm hit, causing an accident. Water began flooding the cargo hold, but the captain refused to open the doors. He was afraid the elves would fly away, leaving him with no profit. In the end, the entire ship was shattered by the storm and sank into the sea. Vignette was lucky she drifted ashore, the only survivor. She was taken by the police to the estate of the Spurnrose siblings, Ezra and Imogen. Ezra was the owner of the lost ship. As the sole surviving elven laborer, Vignette was forced to work as a servant. She would have to work off the cost of her passage. Ezra was an ambitious aristocrat. He could have lived comfortably off his inheritance, but he wanted to build his own empire and ended up squandering almost all his wealth. His sister, however, was still unaware of the family's financial crisis. Imogen was getting dressed carefully. A new neighbor was moving into the mansion next door today. She wanted to seize the opportunity to attract the rich bachelor, but she ran out of her favorite perfume, so she ordered Vignette to go buy it. In reality, Vignette had deliberately spilled the perfume. She just wanted a chance to leave on her own. She went to the brothel in the Carnival district. There, she reunited with her best friend. As they talked, Tourmalin noticed Vignette's mourning braid. Realizing the truth, she told Vignette that Rycroft was still alive. Vignette was furious. She believed Rycroft had deceived her and betrayed her love. She swore to make him pay. Back at the Spurnrose estate, Imogen finished dressing up. She and Ezra went to visit their new neighbor. To her shock, the rich new neighbor was a faun. The burg was a city dominated by humans. Fauns, centaurs, elves, and werewolves were all discriminated against. They were forced to take on the lowest-paying jobs. The burg's parliament was divided. The ruling party, led by the prime minister, advocated for equality among all races. The opposition, led by the attorney general, wanted strict segregation. The opposition was growing stronger. The prime minister's chances of winning the next election were slipping away. To make matters worse, his son Jonah was a disgrace. He spent his days indulging in luxury. His favorite pastime was visiting elven brothels for a taste of freedom. But that night, Jonah's reckless life came to an abrupt halt. After finishing his visit, he went to the bathroom. A group of masked men ambushed and kidnapped him. Meanwhile, Detective Rycroft was investigating a gruesome series of murders targeting non-humans. From one of the surviving victims, he gathered a description of the killer: bald, with a thick beard, a snake tattoo on his arm, wearing a uniform. The victim had just arrived in the burg and didn't recognize the uniform. Using these clues, Rycroft quickly identified a suspect, one of his fellow officers. The man's prejudiced remarks enraged Rycroft. Unable to hold back, he punched him, returning to his apartment. Rycroft was still fuming. His landlord clearly had feelings for him, but every time their relationship seemed to move forward, Rycroft would pull away. After everything, Rycroft was fast asleep when Vignette arrived. Knife in hand, she pressed the blade against his throat but couldn't bring herself to strike. Instead, she left, filled with resentment. The next day, Rycroft requested permission to investigate someone within the police force, but the commissioner dismissed it, saying he shouldn't waste time and resources on a case involving non-human victims. Frustrated by his superior's prejudice, Rycroft had no choice but to leave. Just then, he noticed a group of sailors who had been arrested. A thought crossed his mind: just because the killer wore a uniform didn't mean he was a cop. The murders occurred every 3 weeks, coinciding perfectly with when sailors came ashore. So, he went to a bar where sailors gathered. There, he spotted a man who matched the description. Feigning drunkenness, he spilled his drink on the man, using the moment to pull up his sleeve and reveal the tattoo. Realizing he had been exposed, the man bolted. When he was finally cornered, the bald man looked at Rycroft and whispered, "I've seen something," from the darkness. Then, without another word, he leapt to his death. On the shore, a woman hummed a tune. She had no idea that something was watching her from the sewer drain nearby. A creature with tentacles for a beard lurked in the shadows. The woman, gathering mushrooms, stumbled upon an object. It was the photograph of Rycroft that Vignette had discarded. She stared at it, lost in thought. Then, she sensed danger emanating from the sewer. She turned to fly away, but it was too late. A monstrous arm lunged out, dragging her into the darkness. The next morning, a mutilated body was found on the shore. The sight was so gruesome that even the most hardened officers recoiled in horror. Rycroft had barely solved one serial murder case, and now another had begun. This time, the killer was even more ruthless. While searching the dead woman's home, he found an old man hiding inside. His name was Runyon. He was a friend of the victim. He had only recently arrived in the burg to visit her. He didn't seem like a suspect. Runyon told Rycroft that the woman had once been a famous singer. To prove it, he turned on an old phonograph. Her voice filled the room. Strangely, Rycroft, who rarely listened to music, felt an odd sense of familiarity with the song. Runyon mentioned that she had once performed at a state banquet. After gathering these clues, Rycroft told Runyon to stay in the burg until the killer was caught. Meanwhile, Vignette was at the Spurnrose estate. She was being trained by a fawn housekeeper on how to be a proper servant. For a former elven warrior, this was absolute humiliation. That day, Imogen invited the family lawyer over. Her goal? To find a way to remove the new neighbor, the wealthy fawn. The lawyer informed her that the man had legally purchased the property. There was no way to force him out. Frustrated, Imogen dismissed the lawyer and took Vignette for a walk in the park. Dark clouds loomed overhead, but Vignette had forgotten to bring an umbrella. As soon as Vignette left, the rain poured down. Imogen, dressed elegantly, desperately sought shelter, but no one offered her an umbrella. Then, a gentleman's umbrella appeared over her head. To her shock, it belonged to the very fawn she despised. Imogen's condescending attitude irritated the fawn. In return, he coolly remarked on her choice of perfume and aphrodisiac scent. Crude and desperate, enraged, Imogen stormed off, braving the rain. Back at home, Ezra had been drinking. As he watched Vignette go about her chores, desire flickered in his eyes. He grabbed her roughly, attempting to take things further, but Vignette fought back, striking him hard before storming out. Hearing the commotion, Imogen rushed over. She demanded to know what had happened. Ezra, unwilling to admit the truth, lied, claiming Vignette had stolen from him and attacked him when confronted. Imogen vowed to report her to the authorities at dawn. Vignette fled to Tourmalin, desperate for a way to survive. She wanted to work at the brothel, but Tourmalin knew she wasn't cut out for it. Instead, she suggested an alternative. She could join the Black Ravens. The Black Ravens were an underground syndicate, a criminal gang that operated in the burg's shadows. When Vignette arrived at their hideout, the leader, Black Raven, was dealing with a traitor. They tied the traitor's wings and threw him from a great height, letting him plummet to his death. Black Raven gave Vignette a test if she wanted to join. She had to steal the national flag from the police station. Meanwhile, at the station, the commissioner refused to waste resources on investigating the dead elf. He wouldn't even assign a coroner to examine the body. Rycroft had to turn to an old friend, a fawn butcher who had once been a doctor. After examining the body, the butcher determined that the victim was 90 years old and had given birth at some point. Her abdomen had been slashed open with either a blade or claws, and her liver was missing. Afterward, Rycroft visited his old war comrade, Darius. who was imprisoned. It seemed that, because of Rycroft, the military had spared Darius after discovering he was a werewolf instead of executing him. They locked him up. Returning to the police station, Rycroft arrived just in time to see Imogen filing a report against Vignette for theft. Not wanting Vignette to be arrested, Rycroft went to the Spurnrose estate and bought her freedom. Imogen couldn't understand why a human would pay to free an elf. Even more confusing was why her brother agreed after all. Their family wasn't short on money. Under pressure, Ezra finally admitted the truth. He had lost their father's fortune on failed business ventures. Their only hope of rebuilding their wealth was to mortgage the house and buy another ship to continue the elf trade. Imogen was furious. She refused to risk their home. It was the last remnant of their family's dignity. Besides, she had no faith in her brother's business skills. Still, they needed a way to climb back up. That's when Imogen thought of their neighbor, Agrius. He had been struggling to gain acceptance in high society. If she helped him fit in, he might invest in Ezra's new ship. So, she invited Agrius for afternoon tea the next day. Meanwhile, an elven nun from the monastery sought out Rycroft. She requested that he oversee the singer's burial ritual. During the ritual, she revealed that the singer had been a devout believer. Every week, she would come to the monastery to pray for someone. The nun used her divination ability and saw a terrifying darkness. She told Rycroft that the singer had been killed by a dark entity once summoned through forbidden magic. At the same time, Vignette and Tourmalin arrived at the police station. It was time for Vignette to complete her initiation into the Black Ravens. Tourmalin created a distraction while Vignette slipped inside. She reached the center hall and was about to succeed, but the wind from her wings caught a guard's attention. In a panic, she fled into Rycroft's office. Rycroft took one look at her and immediately understood she was trying to join the Black Ravens. He urged her to reconsider. Still bitter over his deception, Vignette lashed out. They argued, but in the end, Rycroft helped her escape. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister received news his son had been kidnapped. Enraged, he fired his son's bodyguard on the spot. In this city, being dismissed by the Prime Minister meant you'd never find work again. Desperate, the man walked away, uncertain of his future. At the same time, Hayati, the Prime Minister's wife, summoned the family's seer. The seer had served their family for years, possessing great power. She had once foretold that the Prime Minister would rule a nation. That prophecy was why Piety had married him. The seer also predicted that their son would surpass his father. The Prime Minister had always been skeptical, but now, he was desperate. Using entrails for divination, the seer gave him a chilling answer. The one who took Jonah was someone he knew, and he was the next most likely candidate for the Prime Minister's position. Hayati and the Prime Minister immediately thought of the Attorney General. Meanwhile, Jonah sat completely naked in a dimly lit bathhouse. A woman in high heels walked past him. To his shock, it was his mother Piety. It turned out that everything had been part of her plan to secure her husband's position as Prime Minister. In the dark sewers, a man stumbled upon a monstrous creature, half bull, half octopus. At the same time, the creature noticed him. It slowly advanced toward the man. Panicking, the man fumbled under his belt for a gun. Rycroft managed to track the creature thanks to an orphan from the monastery. The child had woken up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and had witnessed the abbess being killed. The boy reported it in time, allowing Rycroft to reach the scene immediately. There, they discovered massive hoof-like footprints. Near the spot where they disappeared, an open sewer gate was found. Rycroft emptied his shotgun. The creature's stomach was blasted open, leaving a gaping hole. But when he looked down to reload, and then back up, the creature had vanished. Rycroft couldn't understand why it hadn't attacked him. On the ground, he found a fresh piece of human skin. It was likely from the abbess. Since this time the victim was human, the case gained more attention from the authorities. A forensic doctor was assigned to perform the autopsy. Coincidentally, the abbess had once taken care of Rycroft when he was a child. Like the previous victim, the elven singer, her body had been cut open, and her liver was missing. But why was the killer taking human skin? Neither Rycroft nor the doctor had any answers. Rycroft thought of the elven nun. Maybe she knew something. The nun told him that in ancient elven folklore, there was a dark entity called the Umbra Aster. It was a being created from the stitched-together limbs of the dead, bound to its master in life and death. Rycroft was skeptical. The nun urged him to seek out a gut reader. He would prove that the legend was real. Rycroft bought a dead fish and went looking for the gut reader, only to run into Vignette. He tried to explain why he had lied to her, but once again, she refused to forgive him. And this time, one of the Black Ravens saw them talking. The gut reader turned out to be Piety's personal sorceress. Rycroft brought her a dead fish and a dead rat. When he explained what he was looking for, the sorceress warned that this wasn't simple. The Umbra Aster had to be bound to a master. As long as the master lived, the creature was immortal. Creating it required something powerful from the master's body, something full of life energy. Before Rycroft could react, the sorceress drugged him. He woke up moments later, trembling from a dream filled with strange sensations. Still weak, he glared at the sorceress. "If you're lying to me," he whispered, "you will pay the price." Meanwhile, back at the Black Ravens, Vignette was accused of conspiring with the enemy. She insisted that she and Rycroft were nothing but a past relationship. The leader gave her a choice. She had one day to find out who in the gang had been leaking information to the police. If she failed, she would die. Tourmalin found out what happened and turned to Rycroft for help. Through his contacts, Rycroft uncovered the traitor's identity. The Black Ravens ordered Vignette to kill him. Vignette planned to seduce and catch him off guard, but the traitor saw through her act. They fought in midair, tumbling violently. When they crashed to the ground, Vignette was losing. Just as she was about to be killed, Rycroft arrived and saved her. He eliminated the traitor and destroyed the evidence. Vignette returned to the Black Ravens with the traitor's severed wings. From that moment, her relationship with Rycroft slowly began to mend. At the same time, Imogen and Agrius reached an agreement. She would use her family's influence to help Agrius integrate into high society. In exchange, he would invest in her brother's new ship. Elsewhere, the Attorney General was having dinner with his daughter, Sophie. Sophie was intelligent and well-educated. Unlike her father, she advocated for equality and freedom. That evening, she told him she wanted to leave for an educational journey. Since childhood, the Attorney General had kept Sophie locked away in their mansion, forbidding her from traveling. He was especially strict with her, often resorting to physical punishment. When Sophie refused to obey, he raised his hand to strike her. At that moment, a group of masked men stormed in and took him away. As her father was dragged off, Sophie smiled knowingly. It was as if everything had gone exactly as she had planned. The Prime Minister waited and waited, but no ransom demand ever came. Piety continued to weep every day, begging to see her son. Finally, at his breaking point, the Prime Minister ordered the Attorney General to be captured and tortured for information. It didn't matter if there was proof as long as he confessed to Jonah's location. That would be all the evidence they needed. Despite the brutal torture, the Attorney General said nothing. Piety requested permission to speak with him. She hoped that their past relationship would make him talk. Years ago, the two had once been lovers. So, when she entered the cell, he let his guard down. Without hesitation, he drank the poison she offered. Moments later, he was dead. Piety composed herself, putting on the perfect performance. She played the role of a woman torn between grief and relief, devastated by his death but overjoyed to have found her son. Soon, the entire Berg police force was deployed. They discovered Jonah, alone and unguarded, in the abandoned bathhouse. When Jonah returned home, he embraced his father. His mother walked in behind them. The sound of her heels clicking against the floor made Jonah freeze. Everyone believed Jonah was a reckless playboy, but in reality, he was shrewd and highly intelligent. The fool he played was an act. Just from the sound of his mother's heels, he already knew the truth, but he kept his face blank. He pretended to be completely unaware. Yet Piety's schemes weren't over. To prove the existence of the Umbra Aster, a man brought the sorceress a dead fish and a dead rat. 3 days later, the sorceress succeeded. She created a hybrid creature, a rat with half a fish's body. She cut it into 3 pieces, yet it remained alive. As long as its master lived, it was immortal. As Rycroft was leaving, he noticed a strange anatomical chart on the wall. The sorceress explained that in the dark elven world, there was magic capable of extracting secrets from a person's liver. So what secrets was the Umbra Aster searching for? Rycroft arrived at the monastery, looking at the small bed where he had slept as a child. Memories of his childhood happiness came flooding back. Suddenly, a memory surfaced in Rycroft's mind, him staring at the curtain fluttering in the night breeze. It felt as though someone had just left. Rycroft found one of the monastery teachers and asked if the abbess had any hidden secrets. As expected, he learned that on the abbess's days off, he would go to an elven brothel. Rycroft went to the brothel to question the owner. At first, the owner refused to say anything to protect his client's privacy, but when he realized that the abbess had been murdered as part of a serial killing, he understood the gravity of the situation. He told Rycroft that every time the abbess visited, he would always book the same room and request 2 women, but that was just to cover his real purpose was to meet his secret lover. Inside that very room, Rycroft found the coroner. It turned out that they had been lovers all along. Because of society's judgment, they had no choice but to meet in secret. Rycroft couldn't help but admire the coroner's composure. Even while performing an autopsy on his own lover, he didn't reveal a hint of emotion. From the coroner, Rycroft also learned that the abbess and the elven singer had been close friends 20 years ago. That meant the creature wasn't killing at random. But what was the connection between the victims? After Jonah was rescued, the Prime Minister forbade him from visiting the Carnival District again. He reminded him that, according to prophecy, Jonah would surpass his father's achievements. He needed to focus on his education instead of indulging in distractions. After dinner, Jonah's tutor took him to observe a parliamentary session. With the Attorney General dead, his daughter Sophie had temporarily taken his seat until the next election. Everyone was waiting for her to embarrass herself. During her speech, she passionately argued that non-humans were ruining the city. She declared that all magical creatures should be driven out so that the burg could belong to humans again. She also ruthlessly criticized the ruling party for being weak and incompetent. Her speech was powerful, aggressive, and full of fire. She immediately won over her late father's supporters. This revealed just how cunning and politically sharp Sophie truly was. And at that moment, she also captivated Jonah's attention. That night, the coroner sat alone at home, drinking. He thought back to the first time he met the abbess 20 years ago. It was the day he helped cut the wings off an elven baby. Just then, the Umbra Aster came for him. At the same time, Rycroft found himself unable to sleep. The melody he had heard at the elven singer's house kept echoing in his mind. So he returned to her home and played the phonograph once more. As he stared at the wall, he noticed the painting of wings and tiny handprints. Then, it hit him. It was a lullaby, one he had heard countless times as a child. Every night, after he fell asleep, an elf would come to his bedside and hum the song. Rycroft realized the truth. His mother had given him up so he could have a better future in the city, but she had always loved him deeply and watched over him from the shadows. He went to the morgue and kissed his mother's cold forehead. The Umbra Aster had only been targeting people connected to him. His mother, the abbess who had raised him, the doctor who had cut off his wings. But only Rycroft could see the connection, and he could never reveal it or his mixed blood identity would be exposed. So what was the summoner's true goal? And who would be the next target? The coroner's death was serious enough to bring the police commissioner to the crime scene personally. He demanded to know why Rycroft had failed to catch the killer. Rycroft knew the answer, but he couldn't reveal his identity. Back at the station, the commissioner complained to an investigator about how slowly Rycroft was solving the case. So much time had passed, and he still hadn't found any connections between the victims. Of course, the commissioner took this opportunity to mock and discredit Rycroft. He claimed that if it had been him investigating, the case would have been solved already. Just then, an officer reported that the coroner had been seen at an elven brothel before his death, and Rycroft had also been there. The commissioner immediately sensed that Rycroft was hiding something, so he ordered the investigator to look into him. Meanwhile, Rycroft and his lover shared an intimate moment. Afterward, she brought up the idea of starting a family together, but recent events had made Rycroft question everything. Did he really need to live as a human in this world? After all, humans were far more corrupt than magical creatures. Aside from appearance, there was no real difference between the two, yet humans treated them with such disdain. What would happen if the woman he loved found out he was a half-blood? Rycroft decided to tell her the truth. As expected, the woman who had just been eager to start a life with him, now looked at him with disgust. Furious and repulsed, she left. She also told him to leave her home immediately. Meanwhile, Rycroft's mother's old friend had been stranded in the burg. Due to travel restrictions, he was forced to make a living by performing on the streets. He used kobold puppets to reenact the city's recent murders, telling the grim tale to an audience. It was also his way of honoring his fallen friend. But then, a police officer approached him for a permit check. When they discovered the kobold performer had no entry papers, he was taken to the station. At the police station, Runyon advised him to check the latest immigration law. Under the new regulation, kobolds were allowed visa-free entry. The officer gave him a half-hearted response, saying he would look into it. Runyon dozed off while waiting. When he woke up, the kobold was gone. He asked where he was, only to learn that he had been deported. The officer had been careless, sending him away before realizing the paperwork was incorrect. Another example of the city's corruption and injustice, but there was nothing Runyon could do. Rycroft found him and asked for information about his mother's past. Once Runyon learned Rycroft's true heritage, he told him everything. His mother had given birth to him with the help of Ezra's father. Meanwhile, the woman who had rejected Rycroft was still heartbroken. Then, the police arrived at her doorstep. Under pressure, she revealed everything about Rycroft's true identity. The commissioner quickly pieced the clues together. In his mind, there was only one explanation. Rycroft had murdered everyone who knew his secret to keep his half-blood identity hidden. There was no need for further evidence. Being a half-blood elf was crime enough. The commissioner ordered Rycroft's arrest. At that moment, Rycroft was at the Spurnrose estate. The fawn maid greeted him. She told him that the late Mr. Ezra had sympathized deeply with the elves' suffering. That's why he helped Rycroft's mother, but she didn't know who the child's father was. Rycroft suspected that his father had been eliminating those who could reveal his identity. Just then, a squad of officers stormed in and arrested him. Rycroft was beaten mercilessly and thrown into prison. Inside, he was surprised to see Vignette. Earlier that day, she had passed by the city museum. There, she saw an exhibition of the Noland treasures. A sign at the entrance read, "No elves allowed." Noland was Vignette's homeland. She sneaked inside to take a look. To her shock, the library she had once sworn to protect had been stolen and put on display. Just then, a group of human aristocratic women entered for a tour. Furious, Vignette drove them out, and that was how she ended up in jail. Meanwhile, at the Attorney General's funeral, Jonah witnessed another side of Sophie. Not only did she despise her father, but she was also incredibly close with the fawn servant. This was completely at odds with her public stance against magical creatures. Sophie noticed Jonah eavesdropping. They started talking. She admitted that she knew her father hadn't kidnapped Jonah. Then, she proposed an alliance. They were both heirs to the most powerful families in the burg. Both had been underestimated their entire lives, and they both had ambition. At the same time, the elven sorceress foretold her own death. The next target of the Umbra Aster was herself. Piety was devastated when she heard the prophecy. After all, she had been the sorceress's student. Piety begged her to stay in the Prime Minister's residence, where security was tight. Would that be enough to save her? Elsewhere, Rycroft accidentally awakened the Umbra Aster. During the chase, he tripped over a metal fence. Summoning all his strength, he severed the creature's head. But he had forgotten one thing. As long as its master lived, the Umbra Aster was immortal. Continuation from the previous episode. Although there was no concrete evidence that Rycroft was the murderer, the fact that he had concealed his half-blood identity was enough. To them, elves were even lower than criminals. Shortly after he was imprisoned, his landlady arrived at the police station. Deep down, she still couldn't let go of Rycroft. She had wanted to expose his secret, but she had never imagined he would be accused of murder. So she approached the police and confessed. She admitted that she had accused him out of anger after he ended their relationship. This created a huge problem. Falsely accusing an elf was nothing, but falsely accusing a human? That could get the police commissioner on trial. Panicked, the commissioner rushed to confront Rycroft. All he had to do was deny being the singer's son, and he would be released immediately. But after everything he had been through, Rycroft had finally seen the truth about humanity. He made a decision to accept his elven heritage. He looked the commissioner in the eye and declared, "I am a half-blood." At that moment, Vignette was deeply moved. In their prison cell, the two lovers, after all their suffering, rekindled their love. Meanwhile, Imogen helped Agrius integrate into high society. In exchange, he agreed to invest in her brother's new ship. At first, Imogen was full of prejudice against him, but as they spent time together, she began to see him differently. His graceful manner of speech, his fearless attitude among aristocrats. To humiliate a noblewoman who had insulted Imogen, Agrius outbid her at an art auction. That night, Imogen discovered something in Agrius's house. He introduced her to an electric lamp. Imogen was puzzled. Why use this when oil lamps exist? Agrius explained that electricity was the future. One day, electric lamps would replace oil lamps entirely. Society moves forward, he said. The old will always be replaced by the new. At that moment, Imogen saw Agrius in a new light. A man with a vision for the future. Someone bold enough to challenge tradition. His presence was irresistibly magnetic. For the first time, she let go of her pride and prejudice and fell in love with him. Meanwhile, back at the Prime Minister's residence, Piety was overjoyed. She told the sorceress, "The murderer has been caught. You're safe now." But the sorceress knew the truth. Rycroft wasn't the killer, and she understood there was no escaping fate. She said nothing, simply left the mansion to face her destiny. At the same time, Runyon prepared to leave the city. At the train station, he ran into an old university classmate. The classmate was shocked to see him in such a miserable state. "Someone as brilliant as you, how did it come to this?" Wanting to help, He offered him a job as Jonah's history tutor at the Prime Minister's residence. Meanwhile, Jonah was busy, enjoying his time with Sophie. Afterward, Sophie told him, "One day, when you enter politics, we should rule together." But Jonah laughed. "I have no interest in politics. I just want to enjoy life." Sophie warned him to think carefully. Their union meant the two most powerful families in the burg would be united. Back home, Jonah met his new tutor, Runyon. One glance at Runyon's worn-out shoes told Jonah that he was struggling, so he made him an offer. "I don't care about lessons, just show up, pretend I studied, and tell my father I completed my coursework. I'll pay you double your salary." Then, he turned to leave, but Runyon wasn't like the other tutors. He didn't care about wealth. He had principles. Jonah wasn't angry at all. Instead, he was impressed. Meanwhile, as Rycroft and Vignette shared a quiet moment in their cell, a group of men suddenly arrived. They seized Rycroft, placed a hood over his head, and dragged him into a carriage. When the hood was removed, he found himself face to face with the Prime Minister of the burg, and at last, the truth of his lineage was revealed. Years ago, when the Prime Minister was just a poor young man, he had fallen in love with a singer. She had rejected all her wealthy suitors to be with him, but as his career soared, his father forced them apart, threatening the singer's life. She had secretly given birth to Rycroft. When Rycroft was arrested, his men brought him the execution order. Only then did he recognize the singer's name. Only then did he realize he had a son. Now, he understood Rycroft wasn't the murderer, and Rycroft, too, realized the truth. The killer had been targeting the Prime Minister's son all along. Because they didn't know who he was, they killed everyone connected to him. The Prime Minister agreed to release Vignette. He told Rycroft to go into hiding. Once the release papers were signed, he would arrange for both of them to escape the city. He admired Rycroft, but he knew the only way for his son to be truly happy was to leave the burg behind. Before he could truly get to know his son, he had no choice but to send him away. Meanwhile, inside the Prime Minister's estate, Piety summoned Jonah. She had heard from the carriage driver about his relationship with Sophie. She demanded that he cut ties with her immediately. Jonah was confused. "First, you didn't let me be with improper women. Now, I've found a respectable one, and that's not allowed either?" Left with no choice, Piety revealed the truth. Sophie was his half-sister. They shared the same mother but had different fathers. At the same time, the sorceress accepted her fate. She drank a cup of blue potion and waited for the Umbra Aster to come for her. Back at the government office, Jonah returned to his desk. He immediately ordered his men, summoned the police commissioner. He then began drafting Vignette's release papers. At that moment, a fawn servant attacked him. It was the same fawn who had once served Jonah, the one the Prime Minister had dismissed after Jonah's kidnapping. After being fired, he was recruited by a fawn resistance group. There, he was brainwashed and given orders to assassinate the Prime Minister. Using his knowledge of the palace, he successfully infiltrated. The leader of the resistance was planning something big, a revolution that would change the fate of all fawns, but the Prime Minister barely survived the attack. Doctors managed to keep him alive. Meanwhile, Jonah was at Sophie's home breaking up with her. Surprisingly, Sophie already knew before they were intimate that they were siblings, and she didn't care. In their family, this was not unusual. Power was only born through strong alliances. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs married their relatives to solidify their rule. Seeing Jonah hesitate, Sophie wrote him a note, a proposal. She told him to think it over carefully. Just then, a servant entered with news of the Prime Minister's assassination attempt. Jonah, overwhelmed by everything, showed little reaction. He had no strong feelings about his father's fate, because now, he believed his father had never truly seen him as his successor. Jonah was certain that the Prime Minister knew about Piety's crimes. He must have also known about Sophie's true identity. And maybe, deep down, he had always questioned if Jonah was really his son. The Prime Minister, on the other hand, was heartbroken over Jonah's misunderstanding. He had once doubted, but in the end, he had fully accepted Jonah as his son and heir. But Jonah didn't care anymore. He left the room without another word. Meanwhile, Rycroft was waiting at the brothel for Vignette's release. Suddenly, word came the sorceress had been found dead. Since the brothel was near her home, Rycroft arrived before the police. He found the sorceress's mutilated body, her abdomen torn open. Yet, she was still alive. Because she had drunk the blue potion, she had held on just long enough to warn Rycroft. The master of the Umbra Aster is the Prime Minister. Elsewhere, Piety was tending to the Prime Minister. From his conversation with Jonah, He had pieced everything together. The true mastermind behind all of this was Piety. She had learned that the Prime Minister had another son, which meant that, according to the prophecy, the child destined to surpass him could be Rycroft. So she had done all of this to ensure that Jonah would be the chosen one. The Prime Minister begged Piety to spare Rycroft. He's just a half-blood. He's no threat to Jonah. I will give Jonah everything. But he underestimated Piety's ruthlessness. Piety smothered him with a pillow. Then, she cut open his abdomen and removed his liver. She had come too far to stop now. Rycroft had to die. But when she inspected the liver, it only revealed Vignette's location. The Prime Minister had no idea where Rycroft was, so Piety forged official documents to have Vignette transferred from prison. Rycroft quickly realized that Piety was behind Vignette's disappearance. He returned to the sewers where he had last encountered the Umbra Aster. Following the tunnels, he planned to track it back to the Prime Minister's estate. At that moment, news of the Prime Minister's death spread. His advisors immediately suspected Piety. She had been the last person in his room. Jonah ordered her arrest. Meanwhile, deep in the underground tunnels, Rycroft fought the Umbra Aster once again. Using his strategy, he severed its head. Then, he found the laboratory where Vignette was being held. Piety stood there waiting. "Blame the singer's blackmail letter," she said. Then, the Umbra Aster revived and attacked Rycroft. Just as Rycroft was about to be overpowered, Vignette broke free from her restraints and killed Piety. With the Prime Minister dead, Jonah took his position until the next election. At the first government meeting, he ordered the lockdown of the Carnival District. The Fawn resistance would be hunted down. After the meeting, Jonah searched through Piety's belongings and found a blackmail letter written by the singer. Knowing that Runyon had once been close to the singer, Jonah brought the letter to him. Runyon immediately recognized the truth. "This wasn't written by her," he said with certainty. "I knew her writing, her tone. This is a forgery." Meanwhile, Vignette and Rycroft prepared to leave the burg, but at the docks, they were stopped. The government had sealed the district. No magical creatures were allowed to leave. However, Rycroft, being human, was permitted to pass, but he refused. By now, he had fully embraced his identity. "I am an elf," he told the guards, and stepped back into the lockdown zone with Vignette. Elsewhere, Jonah sat in his office, examining the blackmail letter. Suddenly, he noticed something. The handwriting was identical to the note Sophie had given him, the one that had contained a single word: marriage. A clear message. She wanted to consolidate power through their union. Jonah confronted Sophie. She confessed everything. Years ago, her father had collected dirt on the Prime Minister for political leverage. That's how he had discovered the affair between the Prime Minister and the singer. But, out of love for Piety, he had chosen to bury the information. Sophie, however, had connected the dots. With the goal of destabilizing the burg, she had written the blackmail letter herself, and everything had gone exactly as she had planned. Because only in chaos, only in disorder, could their generation rise to power. Now, she wanted Jonah to rule beside her, to reform the burg through force. Jonah, seduced by her vision, accepted. And so, for the first time in history, the two rival political factions of the burg were unified. Under Jonah and Sophie, all magical creatures were rounded up into camps, and the burg prepared for a new era, one drenched in blood. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.